Nice to see you too, John.
Yes, good to see you. And we have some people who picture like can't see, and that's okay. But welcome to everybody. I think we'll just go ahead and get started. We want to be uh, wa- want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we've designed this session to be about 15 minutes of presentation, followed by questions and answers. And then following if we run out of time, or if you have questions that come to mind at a later time, you can just reach out to us again through that priority at Ajax email address that you're registered for this program with, and we'll do our very best to get answers for you. And I've been saying that I like to use a message that my friend Kathy Mackay, who used to be president of or executive director of the Board of Trade, and she would often say, "I don't know everything, but I know people who do." And so Cass knows a whole lot more than I do, but between us, hopefully we'll be able to get answers to any questions that you might have. Today, we're going to record this session if you're all comfortable with that. And we want to do that just so that we can make it available to other businesses that weren't able to join one of these two sessions for one reason or another. And so if everyone's comfortable with that, if you're not comfortable, maybe the thing would be to shut your video image off, but hopefully you're all comfortable with that. I think what we'll try to do, it's a fairly large group today. So what we can do is, I think I can access chat somewhere. So if you have a question along the way, maybe just put it in into the chat, and we'll come back to it if you don't want to forget about it. And then we'll make sure that we come back to it at the end of the session. And as I say, we'll answer as many questions as we can and come back to you with follow-up answers where we have to. So with that, I want to thank Cassandra for agreeing to host this webinar today. Cass she works for the town of Ajax, and one of the many things that she does for us is she really is a grants expert. She has the science down pat on how to apply for grants and just the right words to use or turns of phrases, and some other tricks as well. I'm happy to say, and she'll reiterate, with this grant process seems to be a lot more straightforward than many of the other ones are. So we won't need too much of her voodoo mojo, but she can really help you with some of the steps. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Cass and say thank you again for doing this for us.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Don, and hello to everybody. And as Don mentioned, we're here to take questions, as many as we possibly can. However, in the event that there are questions I can't answer, I am happy to, we're going to do a little bit of a roll-up of all the questions that maybe are outstanding, and then we'll submit them to the ministry on everybody's behalf just to get some clarity, and then we'll send that out to the whole group in the event that there are any questions that I can't answer. But what I'll do to start is I'm going to share my screen and kind of walk everybody through a short presentation that we have put together for folks here. So let me just quickly turn this into, perfect. Can you see the presentation itself?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. So this is the Ontario Small Business Support Grant. So this was launched late last week by the province and is intended to really provide a quick cash infusion for small businesses that have been substantially affected. So what this presentation does is we're just going to quickly walk through a program overview where we talk a little bit about, what the eligibility criteria is, and then we'll look at the application process itself. And then from there, we'll go into some helpful tips, and then by then we should be ready to answer any of your questions. So this is the program overview here. So the way they're defining affected small business here is anybody that has been required to close or restrict services based on what is defined in the latest shutdown, which was effective Boxing Day. So many businesses, including many of your own, may have been affected by the lockdown that took place back in the spring. This is just to capture kind of an all-encompassing folks that would be the most affected. There are some exceptions to that. So anybody that is deemed essential, anybody like a grocery store, a convenience store, any government offices, those would not be eligible. But for the vast majority, and there is an eligibility sort of category of types of businesses that I'll show you. For the most part, it is pretty broad brush. So eligible businesses receive at the, if you are eligible at baseline, you will receive $10,000 from the government. And then in the event that there are additional revenue shortfalls that you can show, you'll receive up to $20,000. And now you'll have until March 31st to submit the applications. And we've heard that just anecdotally and from the government themselves, that as of Friday, which was the first full day that the grant had been open, the government received 10,000 applications. So while we haven't received any indication that there's going to be a shortfall in funding, it is just kind of a best practice and a good tip to get those applications in as soon as possible if you are eligible. So the basis of the eligibility is that the business must demonstrate a revenue decline of at least 20%. And what the government has done with this is they've asked you to compare your revenues from April 2019 and compare them to April 2020. So this is intended to show that government's kind of arbitrarily picked April because it is supposedly when businesses would have felt a pretty stark hit right at that point in time, which is right at sort of the peak of the spring lockdown. There are some exceptions that are allowed here. So if you are a business that started after April 2019, or you are a seasonal business, there are conditions and specific questions in the application that pertain to you. It doesn't mean you're not eligible. This was just the baseline for most people. And as I mentioned, to receive the grant, a business has to have been forced to close or significantly restrict their services, that they've experienced a revenue decline of at least 20%, and has fewer than 99 employees at the enterprise level. And we'll talk a little bit about what an enterprise is versus an affiliated enterprise, because the government does make that distinction. It is pretty nuanced. So as we get closer to that in the presentation, if you think you might be an affiliated business, let me know and we can chat offline. It was a pretty specific use case that maybe doesn't affect the vast majority of business owners. So I didn't want to take too much time on that, but I'm happy to have that conversation offline with anybody that needs it. So here are the types of eligible businesses, and as you can see, it is a big, long list, and it is attempted to be as broad brush as possible. On the application itself, there is one field for this, so you can only select one of these categories that applies to your business most appropriately. So if, for example, for some reason, and we can talk about this at the end if there's questions, if your business type or category, if there's nothing here that really makes sense, happy to chat that over with you and see if there's anything that, from my advice that we can help you with picking one, or we're happy to reach out to the ministry to ask for clarification on which category you should be placing your application into. So the application process itself is actually quite straightforward. So this here is the website. You can find it even just by Googling Ontario Small Business Grant Application. This is the same portal when you go to this page where you'll be able to apply for if you've previously applied for the PPE grants that are available for small business, if you actually own the property that you operate your business out of, for the property tax credit rebates, your hydro credit rebates as small business. All of that information is on this website. But if you kind of follow through the process for the small business grant itself, you're going to be brought to a form, and really this is what it asks you to do. So it asks you to provide your legal name of your business, And we talk about this in the helpful tips, but the legal name of your business that you submit, just being mindful that it needs to be exact as to what you've registered your business as. So if there's a comma, there's a space, if there's an ampersand, or you've spelled out the word and, if there's capitalization, those are things that just double checking how your business has been registered in the legal name of it versus what you submit here. That's a really important piece here, because we've had some, anecdotal stories where businesses have been delayed because they've missed a comma or they missed a capital letter. So just being mindful of that. Your CRA business number, so that would be, the majority of small businesses would have this. However, if you are a sole proprietor, you are eligible. However, you would need a CRA business number. And so when you go through this process, there's a phone number that's listed on the application for you to contact the CRA and find out the best way to go about getting that business number. You'll need the address and contact information for the grant itself. And this would, probably be yourselves as the owners of the business. But if it's not, and you work with somebody else that has signing authority, it has to be that person that does the actual submission, because the government would need somebody with signing authority to be making the claim. So as we talked about, you'd have to select one of the categories of the businesses. You'll have to note your number of employees, and your employees include all of your full-time, part-time, seasonal employees. And there is a deadline to that I'll talk about in a minute, but you'll need to know your number of employees. You'll need to calculate your revenue loss, which I'll show you on the next page. And you'll need to provide your banking information, which is your account number, basically how the government can send you an electronic funds transfer to your bank account. So things like your transit number, your branch number, that kind of standard direct deposit information, you're asked to provide that as part of the application process itself. So on the calculating revenue loss, so if your business has been operational from at least April 2019, which I imagine is a lot of folks, that's where you just you'll follow the calculation on the right hand side here. So the form itself does this calculation for you. So there's a slot that says, what was your April 2020 revenue? What was your April 2019 revenue? And if you input that information, it does this calculation here on the right for you. However, if you want to deem your eligibility before you go through this process, this is the formula that you would follow just to double check that your percentage number that you end up with is greater than 20%. Just before you go through this process, if you wanted to check that yourselves. Otherwise, the form does the math for you. So there's not it's not too onerous. Now, for a business that's not in operation or that was not in operation in April 2019, what they'll do is they'll ask when your business started. And then based on that, they'll ask you for two separate comparable dates. So again, it's very similar. The government will just adjust the dates that they're asking for you in the form. And if you are a seasonal business, so like you're a ski hill, snowmobile, tour company, something like that, you will be given the opportunity to tick a box that says, I am a seasonal business. And they'll ask you to compare either your December or January 2019 with your December 2020. Just for a comparison basis, because obviously folks that operate seasonal businesses, particularly winter seasonal businesses, would, April 2020 and 2019 would probably not paint a great picture of the types of losses that have been experienced. So this is where we talk a little bit about enterprise versus affiliated enterprise. So in the event that there is in the event that your business is structured in such a way that there are multiple corporations, the government is looking to obtain the whole picture, for example. So if there's one of your corporations that is connected to the one that you're applying for, but it's done really well, there are some nuances to the application. And, please let me know in the chat or reach out to the priority email if you think this might affect you, and we're happy to walk you through that on the side. But I didn't want to spend too much time on affiliated enterprises, just in the event that it likely is not broadly applicable to everybody. And then your employee count for the purpose of this grant, as I mentioned, includes all of your full-time, part-time, seasonal staff, but it is as of April 30th, 2019. So that's the baseline that the government is looking to use. So in terms of helpful tips, I've mentioned the legal name must be exact, your CRA business number. So obtaining that is going to be really important and having that up front. Another tip that we have is that the government is able to request your documentation to back up your submission. Because really this is just a form you're filling out online that says that you had 42 employees or that you had a revenue in April 2020 of $42,000. You don't have to provide any of that paperwork up front. But what the government is saying is that for 6 years, they have the ability to come back and ask you that. So just being mindful that you do have these materials on hand and that you are keeping them in a safe place, obviously, in the event that there's any further clarity requested by the government. We've heard anecdotally that using Chrome is the best way to do this application. Other browsers have, there's been some reported glitches using other browsers like Firefox or Internet Explorer and Safari as well. And basically, the government has kind of set 10 days as their benchmark for processing and remitting payments. So from the date that you apply to 10 days from there, 10 business days is what they say. That is when you can expect the funds to hit your account, assuming that the government has no further questions for you. So it is a relatively quick process. And, as John mentioned, there's not, unlike a lot of grant applications that ask you to write, big paragraphs and attach tons of documentation, the government really does seem quite intent on getting these funds out the door as quickly as possible to affected business owners. So the form itself to go through, if you have the information in terms of your revenue numbers and your employee numbers, this application should probably take you no longer than 15 minutes to complete. So it really isn't overly onerous, but it can, as we've noted here, be a little bit tricky. And then again, if you are an affiliated enterprise or your business started after April 2019, there are some of these potential complications, but we're happy to support you through those parts if there's a requirement to do so. Now, that's the end of the presentation. So maybe we'll move to see if there are any questions.
I don't have any in the chat area, but if anyone has a question, maybe just go ahead and ask it.
Okay, I have a question.
For Ellen.
Yes, I have a question. So in my business, as being a hair salon owner, I have staff that are employees, but I also have people that rent chairs. And of course, they are just like me, out of work right now, and they're also not able to pay their rent right now to me. So does that qualify? Because I have less employees than people that I have renting chairs in my salon. Does that make a difference?
So I can double check to see that, like, income from I guess it would almost be like it's contractors or something like that, right?
Yeah, so they're self-employed, all of them. So they have their own business number and so on. But they're not really employees of mine. Okay.
So I'm happy to ask that question. I mean, right off the bat, that sounds like that is income that you otherwise would be receiving to your business. Exactly. But I will, just to be on the safe side, because I never want to give advice that could have a big impact on you. That will be a question that we ask the ministry this evening. And the response, I'm expecting the response time to be some time within 48 to 72 hours.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a question, please.
Sure. Go ahead, Ms. Christine.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's actually just piggyback on that a little bit. So I'm self-employed, and my teachers at the dance studio, they're all also self-employed. So they are contractors. They're not officially employees. So how would I mark that down? Do I say 0 employees or?
So the list of what is an employee does not include contract workers in the guidelines, but I'm happy to ask that question as well.
Thank you.
So does that mean that we qualify as a sole proprietor then? Because
Yes.
you're also not an employee, you're sole proprietor.
Right. So you would qualify as a sole proprietor. It would just be a question of if they were counting contracted partners as employees.
Okay.
Thank you.